We're at section 4 now, the strain of war. We're going to talk about two important Southern victories, one of them being Fredericksburg. McClellan will be fired, replaced by Ambrose Burnside, who didn't feel he was up to it, and he was probably right. So if you take a look at that picture, that truly is where we get the term sideburns. So if we remember the Anaconda Plan, one of the steps was to take Richmond, and that's what Burnside is going to try to do. He will try to outflank or move around. It won't work. He'll lose 12-5. Confederates lose less than 5-5, and he will resign. If we take a closer look at Fredericksburg, you can see the troops before and after. The final numbers: killed, wounded, captured, missing. More than twice as many as the Confederates. If we go on to Chancellorsville, Joseph Hooker will replace Burnside. And yes, things did get named after him too. He's got 110,000, Lee 59,500, gonna surround Lee. But Lee discovers his plan and feels that he can take advantage of Hooker splitting up his forces. So if we take a look at how this plays out, you can see that the Confederates will push Hooker back, and then eventually they will withdraw, which is an organized runaway. But at the cost of Stonewall Jackson, who was mistakenly shot by his own men. There is no more oxymoronic phrase than friendly fire. Here are our final numbers. You can see the Union and the Confederate are closer together, but it is still a Confederate victory. Abe has been struggling with leadership. McClellan was great at training his troops, but not using them, which of course makes you very popular with your troops, because if you get used, you get shot at. Burnside was extremely mediocre. Hooker was extremely overconfident of his abilities, and now it brings us to George Meade, the snapping turtle who will take on Gettysburg. Gettysburg was the second major movement of General Lee into the North. This is not military history, so we're not going to spend a lot of time discussing that. You can see how the Union forces, everybody talks about a fishhook. Gettysburg, this is not where the North won the Civil War, but in all likelihood, this is where Robert E. Lee lost the Civil War by his poor judgment and insisting upon charging in blind without really knowing what exactly was going on. And it ended up in lots of dead men and horses, over 5,000 dead horses rotting in the summer heat. That's something that you don't think of. That is a serious health issue. I don't want to have to bury a horse. Carried to the town, the women came out, took the task of burying the dead. Initially, everybody was buried in shallow graves. They came back later, dug up the Union soldiers. They were divided by state, buried in these semicircles in a much more dignified fashion. And as they buried these soldiers, they were surprised by how many of them turned out to be women. Now, obviously, it's a small minority, but historians guess anywhere from 400 to 1,000 women disguised themselves as men and fought in the Civil War. So here are our final totals. Even though the numbers look fairly close, the Union's population is probably its largest advantage. Those are Southern troops that cannot be replaced. Back to the Anaconda Plan. On the other side of America, Vicksburg will be the last holdout for keeping the North from completely controlling the Mississippi. A siege, it's not a battle, a siege. We surround you and we outlast you. You can see the mortars there on the left. Those are not normal cannons. Mortars are designed to go high in the air. So obviously they're not going to go as far, but they can drop in on things, over walls and such. You see the ironclad gunships who were sailing up the Mississippi. They also used those to fire on Vicksburg. Hour after hour after hour, day after day after day of continuous artillery bombardment. Women, elderly children sought refuge, caves along the river. 47 days, food supply. They ate dogs, horses, mules, rats, and each other. Cannibalism, it happens, before surrendering on July 4th. I've not been there to check, but supposedly they still fire no fireworks in Vicksburg on the 4th of July. After Gettysburg, Lincoln will be called to give what is now the famous Gettysburg Address. That is a really horrible picture because that was the only picture taken of President Lincoln at Gettysburg. You have to set those cameras up with exposure and flash. And the first speaker spoke for about 2 hours, so they didn't feel there was any rush in setting up the camera to get Lincoln in and out in 2 minutes. You gotta like that. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.